Hello, welcome to our lecture today on the malicious dead, possession and exorcism in South India. We might have a lot of movie ideas about exorcism, such as from the movie The Exorcist and its original novel by William Peter Blatty. But exorcism is something, and possession is something we find in almost all cultures. And it looks a little different than you'd see in a horror movie, as we're going to get into today. So what is exorcism? Well, exorcism is the forcible extraction of a ghost, a spirit, or a deity who inhabits a victim. Types of possession and exorcism are found in all sorts of different cultures. Usually possession involves very similar patterns, namely calling and confronting the demon or this attacking spirit who speaks through the demoniac. That's D-E-M-O-N-I-A-C. So you have the demon, the demoniac or daimoniac, who is the one who is afflicted, and then you have the exorcist. So the demon will speak through the demoniac and can exhibit all sorts of features. And you get, like in the Catholic tradition, you hear a lot of speaking in different tongues, bad smells, incredible power, great strength and whatnot. But when we see it, generally it's people that go into a trance of possession and the afflicting spirit speaks through them. Sometimes they'll writhe about, sometimes they'll chant, they'll usually sway their heads around, as you've seen in some of the videos. But not a lot of this sort of extreme specifics that you find within sort of the Catholic model and the horror movie model for that matter. The exorcist questions the entity that is afflicting the victim, gets sort of details about that demon or that demonic entity, and then uses those details to perform the appropriate ritual to evict the terrible spirit. When someone is done being possessed, they're generally reintegrated into society as sort of effective human beings. Now, what we see is that they do often experience a reduction in sort of mental or even physical suffering. It's surprising how often exorcism actually does make a difference in people's lives. It does cause them to be somewhat better, somewhat healed. Some people, even after exorcism, exhibit that they have a closer connections to angels, gods. They might even experience that they have newfound spiritual powers. So the classic movie about exorcism is The Exorcist, was adapted out of a novel by William Peter Blatty. Blatty was a practicing Catholic himself, and it's quite an interesting little novel. I love the movie as well. But we also have a character named Malachi Martin. Sorry, I almost said Mordecai Kaplan, who's a Jewish theologian. Mordecai Kaplan wrote a book called Hostage to the Devil, and I have been told that, in fact, that's a text that does get sort of circulated within the communities of priests even to this day, even though it's a non-sanctioned text by the Vatican. Malachi Martin was a priest, but he had like this sort of weird dispensation where he was a Jesuit priest, but he somehow lapsed, and so he would walk around in a business suit and whatever, and he was still a priest, but he didn't have a vow of poverty anymore, so he made a ton of money publishing, and he would also go around and do exorcisms. I find it intriguing that this Catholic father here would often appear in a normal business suit. However, we have other people. My favorite is Bob Larson. He's a Protestant. He's out of Texas, and he's been talking about exorcism and depossession and possession and the evils of heavy metal music and satanic ritual activity since the 1980s. These days, he's mostly retired, but he keeps coming back to do, say, exorcisms by Skype. But he has 3 good-looking young daughters that go out and exorcise people as well. Intriguingly, you see here, he's wearing a Roman Catholic collar, but he's a Protestant. So here we have a Protestant dressing as a Catholic in order to perform exorcism. So that gives you a notion of how the power of these symbols and symbolic dress. I know I asked a Catholic priest friend of mine, I'm like, what does it look like to you when you see a Protestant wearing the Roman collar? And he says, I don't know, it's like watching a little kid dress up like a fireman. All right, so let's get into this a little bit more. Scholars generally describe exorcism and possession to be sort of means by which people deal with mental illness, or as a means for subaltern, lower class people, so people who do not have a lot of power in society to speak about their frustrations and their pains. It's a challenge to the social order. It's a safety valve where people can be possessed and say the things that they wouldn't be able to say otherwise. And why would someone want to be possessed? Well, no one would want to be possessed, but what about exorcists? We see that possession and exorcism demonstrates the power of one deity or one cleric or one priest over past deities, minor deities. You notice that demons, usually in the Christian tradition, are derived from other cultures. So we have Beelzebub, who is Baal-zebub, the fly god in, I believe it's Mesopotamian cultures. So when someone performs an exorcism, they can argue that the spirits that are possessing others are from different religions, and then by performing the exorcism, they show that their god is more powerful than the gods where the demons came from. Now, we're going to be talking about Isabelle Nobokov's book, Religion Against the Self, which is about South India, specifically in Tamil Nadu, which is southeastern India, and it has a specific set of patterns. She focused predominantly on women, as she finds that the majority of people that get possessed are women. Many of these themes will stretch across India. We'll see throughout our reading. Okay, so the root cause and pattern for possession, according to Novakov, is that young, unhappy brides, they seek to separate from their husbands and their husbands' families. Remember that when you're married, especially as a woman, you go to live with the extended family of your husband, in which you basically become the lowest rung in the pecking order, and often young brides do the majority of the domestic labor in large joint families. So these young brides have decided to separate from their husbands usually. So what goes on here is, this is the wrong slide. What goes on here is that the diagnosis of possession, when somebody says, okay, this person is possessed, is an accusation of marital infidelity. Exorcism ejects the ghost, ejects that spirit that is actually considered to be like a lover to the one who's possessed. And then the exorcism reintegrates the woman in society, making her a good wife. She gains a new subjectivity. She once was an errant bride. After she is exorcised, then she becomes an inherent good wife who will behave in the ways that all the people around her want. Now, who are these ghosts? Who are these demons? Well, they're generally men who died untimely deaths. Usually they were suicides who killed themselves due to marital failure or an inability to marry. After possession, some women will actually become diviners. They'll be in the system where they can spot and figure out who is possessed and how they are possessed. Others will become devotees of the deity who helped exorcise them, whether that's of the goddess that we see of the goddess Amma, or mother, as we'll see in our reading for today. The exorcism experience actually enables a better and more positive relationship with the unseen. Once you have that deity or that ghost expelled from you, then you can have a goddess within you, or you can interact with other deities in a way. It's all your interior energy and relationship with the unseen isn't taken up by that demonic entity. So scholars get a lot of this stuff wrong over the years. Exorcism and possession are not feminist. They are not egalitarian, as some people have argued. These are strategies for reforming the identity of women in order to better fit cultural ideals. We do have some instances of resistance. In fact, some women will refuse to enter trances, they'll refuse to dance, or when they're speaking as the demon, they will give details that aren't appropriate. So like demons are supposed to be people who killed themselves by suicide, mostly male. So when the person who's exorcising them says, well, what's your name? She'll give a female name. Or she'll say, well, how did you die? Say, oh, I died naturally when I was 85 in my home. So there's ways that people can deploy and challenge this script to make the ritual less effective. So what are some arguments and what are some critiques that have been made? Well, there are some interior arguments to the tradition that say that women are inherently impure. So because women are inherently impure, they pull these demons, these pays, to them. But when we look, it's not women in general, but it's young brides. So there's something specific about young brides. Some will say that sexual activity inherently brings forth demons, but these women are separated from their husbands, and usually it's been established that they have not had normal sexual relations for quite a while. So it can't be the sexual activity between the husband and the wife because they're not having any sex at the time. Other people say that these ghosts, these pets, cause psychic disorders. But in fact, while some women may be mentally ill, most are involved in troubling social situations. And the social customs, not only individual experiences, dictate the exorcism patterns. They exhibit troubling sexual behavior, and the family is able to reshape them. So while one might say, oh, these are just people who have mental disorders and this is how they express them, well, in fact, it's not that they're acting improperly due to being mentally disturbed, but they're in an unfortunate social relationship. It's that social troublingness that causes possession. Finally, people say that demons express societal conflict. Well, Novakov comes through and really clearly argues the women express their pains using demon possession in a socially acceptable way. They're not challenging society. And the end result of exorcism, as I just said, reinscribes women in society. The women don't change society. They're reintegrated into society, changed so that they can be better members of society in a pretty aggressive and somewhat violent manner. So who are these Pays? Pays are unhappy ghosts. So the Pays are spirits of men who have died an unfavorable death, usually by suicide. Now, here's a chance we need to talk about good deaths and bad deaths. In India, good death comes at an old age. Women die before men, so wives before husbands. Proper rituals can be performed in a good death that lead up to a good existence after death. So there's like dying with no impediment to the spirit. So you die outdoors with no roof above you. The spirit exits the body through the crown of the head or the eyes or the forehead, as opposed to say like the anus or digestively. So if someone vomits right when they're in their death throw, it's thought to be a bad expulsion of the spirit. The pragmatic nature of death rituals, like I said, performing all these death rites, is in fact to integrate the person who has died into the land of the fathers, so they become ancestors and they do not become ghosts that can thereby afflict their family members, making people sick and causing all sorts of a ruckus. Bad deaths come suddenly. Traditionally, they say a bad death is a sudden illness, an accident, snake bite, murder, or suicide. Bad deaths, because they happen in such a way that they're sudden, they can't have the proper rituals that go around them, and they have an inherent impurity. The danger of this is that the soul cannot be reincorporated into the land of the fathers, but wanders about afflicting people on the earth. They become ghosts. So why do you do good death rituals? To keep people from coming back and being ghosts. So these Pays become sort of homewreckers. They prey upon erotic feelings and erotic frustrations, which makes sense because they themselves, these Pays, were frustrated lovers in their lives. So in their next life as a ghost, they're trying to feed off erotic energy and erotic feelings. Now, Pays they're demons. They're not devils. And this is a theoretical point I like to make often. We need to see this gal over here. Okay. Demons are like sort of hungry, invisible creatures. They're acting on their own needs. They're like sort of like hungry tigers that are wandering around the wilderness. If a tiger goes and eats a guy who's walking in the middle of the night, is it the tiger's fault? No, he's just hungry and that guy was in the wrong spot. So we confuse demons with devils in Western culture quite a bit. So demons are found in sort of liminal wilderness spaces outside of your usual place. You encounter them. They're not interested in tempting you. They're not interested in converting you. They're not interested in stealing your souls in any way. They just want some grub. They're just hungry. And if you don't feed them, they'll afflict you. So when someone becomes ill in an odd way and it's thought to be a demon, you go and you make a sacrifice out in the wilderness to that demon. You feed the demon. The demon's like, all right, I'm good now. They're little gods. So as such, what we see is that these Pays, these hungry ghosts, afflict women because they want to love them, not because they hate them in any way. And their possession is thought to extend to the sexual. So they're sexually enjoying the women they possess. They're feeding off the energy that they are frustrated by, that sexuality. Now, devils are a little different. Devil's much more of a Western idea. Now, a devil can be found in any location. He comes to you. He communicates with the living in order to lie and corrupt, steal and ruin souls. They are interested in ruining people's lives and in ruining society. They're anti-religion in many ways. Demons are in the religious system. Devils are against the religious system. We have to note that Satan, in fact, was an attorney throughout the Hebrew Bible. His name means the accuser. He was thought to challenge God like an attorney in court would challenge the judge or challenge another attorney or level accusations against the person he is bringing a case against. We do have a notion of female malicious dead, but they're thought traditionally to be too shy to possess people. That said, there are a whole bunch of like female ghostly dead that will afflict people. They're usually said to be skeletal, fanged, their feet are backwards. Here's a depiction of one on the left here, which is a churel. Sometimes they're depicted as not having anything below their breasts or below their waist, and it's just hanging entrails. They will come and afflict men for the most part, making them impotent or ill. They will also attack children. These are women who are thought to have died in childbirth or suicides. And and their favorite targets are male sexuality and childhood. So the difference between demons and devils, I could do a whole class on it. All right, so what is this means by which people become possessed? Well, the Pei finds a woman in an urban or rural wilderness. So traditionally we read that women are attacked when they're walking at the edge of the village, where they are walking like in the heat of the sun or in the darkest of the night, or if they're in like a graveyard or they're in an abandoned temple. There's an idea of a wilderness. Now, in the contemporary world, however, we don't have wilderness in the same way. And the Pei is able to find a woman in an urban wilderness. Where's the urban wilderness? Well, anywhere where a ghost and a suicide is going to hang out. Bus stops, train stations, gnarly old boarding houses and hotels, bad sides of town, and especially cinemas. So what happens is the Pei sees a woman that he finds attractive and he falls in love with her. He attaches himself to a wild hair that will be sticking out, and then through her hair follicle enters into her very essence, into her body. Now, the thing about the Pei and the women is they're similar in a manner, in that both of them are thought to have escapist tendencies. They're beaten by their emotions. So they don't have, in Tamil, they have this idea that someone who is like a powerful person or a good person has a courageous disposition. These are not courageous people. One sense that was described to me by one guru was that someone can be afflicted by demons very easily or by magic and whatnot if they have a light soul. If someone has a heavy soul, it'll be very difficult for a spirit to afflict them in any way. So if somebody's a heavy dude, they're not going to get affected. If they're not, if you're prone to flights of fancies and being over emotional, then you'll be weak and you can be attacked by demons much easier. Yes, so let's talk about hair for a second. Oh, and I like this picture, this guy just kind of looking longingly with his horns. I just feel like that's what it would look like if you encountered one of these things, and then he jumps into your hair and gets into your head, and then you have this weird loving relationship with this weird, creepy, suicidal, love-lost man. Sounds unpleasant. Okay, so hair. Hair in India is different from hair for us in our North American culture. So hair represents sexuality. Hair restrained represents controlled sexuality. So think about monks or sadhus. So monks shave their head, like these Buddhist monks here, to represent their power and control of their sexuality. Now, sadhus or Hindu holy men and swamis will grow their hair very long, but they get them in juttis or dreadlocks. And that is supposed to also represent the restraint of their sexuality. Restraining and controlling your sexuality in these Indian concepts allows you to rechannel that sexual energy into spiritual accomplishment, spiritual practices, or even gaining magical powers. The possessed, who are consistently women, you'll see have wild hair. A proper woman who's in her good state always has her hair bound up tightly into a braid. So women will always bind their hair, showing only their unbound hair to their immediate families or with their husband. Wild hair is thought to be where demons can lock onto a woman, but it also signals sexual energy that is extending outward. So my friend Autumn would say that when she lived in South India for a long period of time, she would pull her hair back in a ponytail, but if there was a little flyover, like her teacher would be like, get that together. So, you know, when you look at Indian women, you'll see that they often have very restrained, traditional Indian women. I mean, not so much now if you're in New Delhi, but if you're in the outskirts of a village in Tamil Nadu, all women who are out in public will have very tightly bound hair. Wild hair demonstrates sexual licentiousness, but as we also saw, that one little wild hair is where the ghost can grab you, lock on, and get into you. We do want to notice one thing that I wanted to mention is that these ghosts attack at high noon. This is the hottest part of the day. This is also the time that it's really good to do black magic. So we have a notion that, you know, everything is clear in the light of day, but we don't have the type of sun and heat that you have in India. So we think of midnight as the darkest, most creepiest of time, but Indians would think of as high noon as being the darkest, scariest of time because of the afflictive heat and the power of the sun that just beats us down and drives you wild. All right, so what is the process of exorcism? So a woman will act or go into like a trance or act oddly in their own home, or she'll separate from her husband and go and live somewhere else. So a possessed woman, and here we have them being recognized. A possessed woman is diagnosed by a chami, which is like sort of a charismatic person. I'll talk about this a little bit more, usually after accusations of a family member. So what happens is family members will be like, she left or she's acting really weird. So they go to this local person who's a chami. These chamis, and chami is the Tamil word for swami or master. These chamis are people who have had sort of, they almost have the shaman pattern. So if you were to read earlier in her book, and Novakov describes one person who becomes a chami as he has a terrible illness after his hand is pierced in a plowing accident, and he gets a terrible fever, and he has a vision of the goddess, and then when he gets better, he has the ability to tell if people are possessed or not, or to do counter magic, and he can do all sorts of things afterwards. But it's that hero's journey of a great crisis that leads to an initiation that is accompanied by a vision of a deity, and then having newfound powers that can be used to benefit society and the people around you. So the chami then gives the possessed person over to the musicians. These musicians are exorcists. They work at a temple. They get paid pretty well in comparison to everybody around them. There's a bunch of them, and then there's a lead one who's sort of like the head singer who will sing along, and he's the one that performs the ritual of getting the demon to speak and eventually getting rid of the demon. Now, initially, a woman will be forced to stay at the temple for many days, undergoing purification, sort of doing circumambulation around, fasting, having very pure food, so getting ready in general. At the end of the ritual, though, we'll see that this this ghost is dispelled from the woman and is placed into a new home, sometimes in the temple, sometimes at the temple's periphery, but the spirit has to be dispossessed so that it can't afflict others. And then the final step in the exorcism is to cause a ritual possession of the formerly possessed person by the goddess of the place. So we're going to talk specifically about one woman who is possessed and her story. This is the story of Shanti. This is in Tamil Nadu, so right down there. That southeast edge of India. So Chami is Shanti, whose name means peace, it's a common name, is a high caste woman. She was married young, and she was actually from kind of a broken home. Her father had married a second wife when she was still pretty young and started another family. Remember, in specific traditional Indian cultures, and that you can have multiple wives. It's not very common anymore, except in very rural areas. So her father had married a second wife and started another family, making her the only child to her mother. Her father married her off when she was really young to an older man in his late 30s whose wife had already died. So he's already in kind of like a state of impurity. It's not a good match. It's not an ideal match. Shanti moves to Madras, so Chennai, the capital of Tamil Nadu, and she's living there with her husband, and the relationship is not good. Eventually, she's like, I gotta get out of here. So she returns home, and and she goes back to her natal village. Remember, when a woman is married, she goes and lives with her husband and her husband's family, which includes his mother and his brothers and whatnot, and his brother's sisters. So this woman, being a second wife and being very young, she's almost guaranteed that if she's living with her extended family, that she's a glorified slave, to put it at the least. She would be doing almost all the domestic duty, and very often these youngest wives get horribly mistreated by their family members, specifically their mothers-in-law. Yes, their mothers-in-law. All right, so she would return to the city. And when she was there, well, she returned to the city after her mother died. So her mother died, and her father forced her to return to the city with her husband. Remember, her father's still oriented toward his second wife and his second life. So having returned to the city, she would often go to the cinema. Around this time, she started acting depressed and moody. Pei are thought to usually catch people at the edge of a village or in the wilderness. You remember I said this before, but there is also an urban wilderness. So a cinema, what's a cinema like? What's it like to go into a movie theater, especially in India? It's a big event. They're huge. Caste is irrelevant. Men and women sit together. People usually go in pretty big groups, but you buy a ticket for where you're going to sit. And you're in a strange place. It's not like going to a temple. It's not like anything else in India. You're put in the dark with strangers. And it's like I said, it's liminal. Men and women sit in the dark. Folks bump up against one another. It is also a place where folks engage in emotional tales. Indian cinema is very emotional. Even an action story will have quite a bit of comedy and romance. But it's thought that in the cinema and watching Indian cinema, you have an emotional reaction to it. As such, remember, our ghosts, our Peis, will feed upon people who are having sort of like a great amount of emotionality. It could also be, in a cinema, it could be a place for illicit sexual activities to happen. Now, we see that other sites of possession are like buses, where people are bumping up against one another and there's no sense of purity or social connection. They are in literally a space in between. You're going from one place to another. The ghosts, when asked, why aren't there, the question would be for a ghost, why are there so many ghosts in the city? Aren't you all supposed to live in the wilderness? And the ghosts would say, according to the Exorcist, they would say, there have been lots of suicides and bad deaths in the city. So there's plenty of us here now. Again, like I said before, think about old hotels, brothels, cinemas, bus stations, anywhere where you can see sort of like a corrupt badness or a ruinedness. That would be a place that would be wilderness. When you can find the urban jungle, that would be the urban wilderness, if you will. All right, so then there's a diagnosis. What happens is a male devotee to Kali, his name is Ragaman, he goes into trance, he diagnoses Shanti as being possessed by a Pei. Like I said before, he had had smallpox, and he had a vision of a goddess, and from thenceforth he had the ability to diagnose when people were possessed and how they were possessed. So the relatives then take her to this temple, Ankala Paramechuvari. I don't speak Tamil. That's not bad. Ankala Paramechuvari. So it's probably Ankala Parameshwari. So that's a goddess name. She who is named Ankala, who is the most glorious mistress. So this is kind of an odd temple. It's a temple to a local goddess. I couldn't find any specific temple pictures of it on the internet. I haven't been to this temple. I'd like to go at some point. This temple is by a cremation ground. Temples aren't usually by cremation grounds, so that's odd. However, temples to the god Shiva, and this temple is associated with the god Shiva, even though it's a goddess temple, in early times would have been found near cremation grounds, because that is where practitioners of Tantra would hang out and practice, and they were predominantly Shaivas. So if you have an old temple that's by a cremation ground, you can probably start looking into the inscriptions and finding that it's associated with one of the different Tantric orders of Shaivas, tracing back to the medieval era. The temple has an image of the goddess, so an iconic image. It's where you can like see her in a sort of human-like form, as you'd see here on the right, but it also has a large termite mound. Well, termite mounds look different there than here. They can stick up very high. They're made of very hard sort of earth and wood pulp. And a termite mound is thought to be a couple of things. One, it's supposed to be a gateway to the underworld. Also, it's thought to resemble the penis of Shiva, so this Shiva Linga, and thereby it's supposed to be a spontaneous manifestation of the god Shiva. In this particular termite ground, it is thought that there are a number of cobras that live in it, and people regularly pour milk and put eggs into the holes of the termite mound to feed the cobras. Now, they're not out of range on this. Cobras often move into termite mounds because they stay cool, they stay warm, whatever they need. They can regulate their heat in there. Also, rodents will live there, so the cobras can eat the rodents. The rodents come in to eat the termites. The cobras come in to eat the rodents. And then also the cobra is associated with Shiva. You will often see him with a cobra around his neck as well. Okay, so this is a local, not a translocal place. It's to a specific goddess of a specific area of this specific town, and she's known to have the powers of depossession and exorcism. So we'll see that these musicians will come and perform the exorcism, but they are thought to be enlivened by the power of that goddess. So these types of temples of exorcising deities are common throughout India and have various, kind of similar patterns. They're local places with some affiliation with a larger god. So this specific goddess associated with Shiva. They're found in unexpected places. Often there are a lot of Hanuman temples, so the monkey god, and connections to older networks of tantric temples and tantric practices. You'll see there are specific ritual experts that are here, and they are associated with the specific local area. Everything about the ritual is rooted in the specific deity and in the specific place where they are acting. So the musicians at Ankala Parameshwari temple meet with Shanti in the morning, and they make her, as the ghost, dance and speak. Well, the Pei, this ghost, speaking through her mouth, declares that he wants a sacrifice of a chicken in order to leave. So they make preparations for sacrifice later. So Shanti's really resistant to actually go into trance and let the ghost speak. So they decide that they're going to do the ritual again later at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when they're ready for the sacrifice. They draw a protective circle around her, which is common that we see in almost all exorcism patterns. They draw, it's called a rekha in Sanskrit. So this specific protective circle is, I guess, the best way to put it. All right, so when you're reading in anthropology and you're reading about someone that's possessed and it says, the ghost or the spirit speaks, just assume that the physical person is speaking, but it's being reported as the ghost or the demon speaking. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they begin to start drumming and singing the preparations of the exorcism. Now, the double-headed drum that they have, you see here on the right, is in fact thought to be created by the goddess for this very purpose. It's said that the goddess slaughtered a bunch of demons and used their skins to create the first drum. So the drum becomes a product of the goddess and contains the goddess's power. The main singer does an invocation to our main goddess, our Parameshwari, and the local pantheon around. So all the spirits of the area are guiding him as he leads this ritual. So at first, Shanti and the Pei would not respond to the singers. In fact, while they're drumming right along, a devotee of this goddess comes in and starts to go into trance and dance. Well, this is a non-malicious type of possession. So Shanti is suffering from possessing. But this woman wanders in and she becomes the goddess. And our musicians address her as Amma, or mother goddess. And so she dances around for a bit, and then they start kind of messing with her. They're like, hey, if you're Amma, you need to do a better job. You need to get out of our way so we can depossess this woman. And if you were doing a better job, you would have kept her from getting possessed in the first place. My question would be, this woman, and we'll see this at the end of Shanti's ritual, I'm wondering if she was previously possessed and was exorcised, and now she returns and goes into trance. Now, does this sound odd? If you spend a lot of time in India, people go into trance all the time. Men and women, mostly women, I've even had a couple of times when I've been involved in some rituals and the drumming got to going and the singing got to be, and I just was gone. So this is something that we're not familiar with, possession, trance, and whatnot, but it's really common in a lot of the cultures of the world. All right, so what happens is the singer, who is the guy who's like the ringleader of the musicians, who's doing a lot of the ritual, sings to the Pei and pleads for the goddess to get the demon to sing and dance. Shanti and the Pei do not respond, so they beat them with Margosa leaves. So Margosa leaves are holy to the goddess and are used in trance possession often. Eventually, they decide to get this ritual really going, and the Pei comes forth. The ghost will initially not answer its name, but he says he's male and he's from a place near Shanti's origin. Finally, the spirit does declare that he is male. His name is Shankar, and he killed himself due to his inability to marry. We see a doubling of Shankar and Shanti. She has an unhappy marriage. He is unable to be married. She is sexually frustrated, as is he. The ghost describes seeing her and catching her at the cinema, and asked why he didn't attack anyone else. He says, oh, because they're Muslim. Remember, she's a high caste Hindu. So this is a Hindu system. So he eventually attaches to her hair and then through her hair follicle gets into her body. Now we're moving on. And I like this picture here because it shows this lonely guy kind of walking around by a rainy cinema. Like I think that ghost was just sort of lurking around. All right, so what about the exorcism ritual proper? Once the Pei and Shanti are sufficiently merged, so now we know who the Pei is, then exorcists can separate them. Shankar and Shanti are sort of double. So once this is all established, they can continue with this rite. Once they establish who he is and what he is, then they can get rid of him. The musicians ask the Pei to leave. In fact, they offer him the blood of a chicken, and the demon refuses it, but eventually they force it to drink the blood. Once it's drank the blood, or Shanti has drank the blood, Novakov, he's like, okay, it's screwed. I'm done. I'm done with this. I'm going to get lost. Now, Novakov describes that there's a lot of resistance to these blood offerings and the rituals due to the nature of Indian society these days, where people don't want to do blood rituals and they're embarrassed by sacrifice, and people are becoming more and more vegetarian in a way to become of a higher status. Because if you're vegetarian, you're going to have a higher status in society in general, have a greater sense of purity and respect. All right, so the demon cries out after he consumes the blood. At this point, Shanti is given a giant rock, and the musicians chase her around while she's carrying this rock until she goes over by a tamarind tree and she drops it. We read that the tamarind is a hardy tree. It's sour. It's somewhat impure. It's at the edge of the temple. So she drops the rock, and they grab her hair around a lock of hair that is supposedly where the demon came in. Previously, in part of the conversation with the demon, he identifies one lock of hair, which is how he got in. So they take that lock of hair and they pull it out and they pound it with a nail into the tree. Now, in a lot of other exorcism rituals in India, people will actually get that knot. They'll find the knot in their own head, and then they'll tie that knot in their knotted hair to like a sacred tree or whatnot, and then they'll pull it out themselves. It's kind of intense. I've seen people do it. Anyway, so what happens? So they take the hair and they knot it onto the tree, and in this sense, the demon is no longer associated with the girl, but he's associated with the tree. We could even argue that he's been installed in the tree. Maybe he's even married to the tree. Remember, he's a sexually frustrated demon, so if you ritually marry him to a bitter tree, maybe he'll be happy and won't go after any more ladies. It's hard to say. Now, we have a little bit of a myth and ritual connection here. There's a classic tale about the god Brahma and the god Shiva that is being described in a very local manner. So let me run through this very quick. So Brahma is given a gift of having 5 heads. He usually has 4 heads. Now, he's like Shiva, because Shiva has 5 heads, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1 on top. He's not like a hydra of some sort. So he looks so much like Shiva, he even makes a pass at Shiva's wife, and it's unclear. She might have gone with him. So Shiva gets really pissy about this, and he goes and he cuts off that 5th head of Brahma. But Brahma had gotten a gift from yet another god that anytime his head was cut off, another one would grow. Finally, Shiva's like, all right, I got a trick. He cuts that 5th head off and holds onto it and won't drop it. And now he can't grow another head. Brahma can't. So Brahma curses him to wander around and go mad. And he does. And so he eventually is off in kind of the wilderness, and he encounters his sister, a goddess. And that goddess says, I can deal with this. And she takes some bloody rice, and she throws the bloody rice on Brahma's head, so it won't grow back, and then also on the one that's stuck to Shiva's hand, and it drops. In this way, Brahma has been thoroughly decapitated and overpowered, and the exorcists explain that this is the reason why they have her carry the rock and drop it. And once Shiva drops that rock, he returns to his normal state. He loses his sense of impurity, and he's no longer crazy. Anyway, so this is a myth that is being acted out in our ritual. Here we see ritual and myth operating together. Does the ritual go before the myth? Hard to say. Or the myth before the ritual? Hard to say. All we do know is that the exorcists explain the reason why they do these rituals, because using myth. Myth is used to justify ritual here. So Shanti falls down unconscious, and she's free of the ghost. However, something else is going to happen. So later, they cover her with turmeric, which is considered very holy, and vermilion or red powder. They put the sacred mark on her forehead, and they initiate her into the worship of the goddess of this temple, this Parameshwari Amma. Now, once they install the goddess into her, they pierce her tongue, and there is no blood. This happens all the time. And then they put several limes on the trident, and she's in. She begins to dance. She dances as the goddess. So where she was once possessed by a ghost, now she is possessed by a goddess that keeps her from being possessed again and gives her a newfound connection to that goddess. Now, some people go on to be in the system of exorcism, maybe recognizing when other folks are being possessed, or maybe even performing exorcisms herself. But Shanti does not. Novakov does note that she returns to the temple once a month and dances in the evening in a devotional manner. And she says that she dances with a sense of grace and self-possession that she never had before. So that is that good possession. That is a sense of good possession and good trance that pervades all of these South Asian cultures. And presumably she goes back to her family and she's a good wife and she never has trouble again. I doubt it, but who knows? So what are we talking about here? Remember that the name of this book is called Religion Against the Self. And what it is it shows, and the book shows, Nabokov shows, that there are all these rituals about possession, counter sorcery, all sorts of, a wild range of rituals that are designed to get people who are having a problem to submit to their culture and to submit to their goddesses and their deities. The goal is when someone's having a problem in society, you do a ritual, and then at the end of the ritual, you reintegrate them into society. Now, they're not resolving their interior problems. They're just learning how to behave right no matter what. And they have a ritual that removes their sense of being out of society and puts them in society and puts pressure on them to behave perfectly. So here's a discourse that focuses on women who are disenchanted with the conjugal life, accusing them of surrendering to fantasies of extramarital intimacy and of therefore jeopardizing the reproduction of their husbands' families. So these women who want to leave their husbands are a real problem. A main purpose of the exorcist dialogue is to delineate and publicize the fact that these women have trespassed the boundaries of cultural reason and have succumbed to marital disappointments and erotic impulses that put them in peril of losing their minds. They wander off, they leave their husbands, they stop having sex with them, and that puts them in a state where they can be possessed. This is why the musicians must first identify them with a prime symbol of frustration. In Tamil culture, the pei represents a quality of sexual yearning that almost always associated with men rather than women. So in an odd way, the pei afflicts a woman, and then the woman has a type of like yearning and sexuality that is usually depicted of by men. Then when they can remove that male spirit from them, the woman can go back to being, this inherently pure, meek, ideal Tamil wife. So to fix the women, they are not given marriage counseling or taught how to work it out. The exorcists forcibly remove the demonic sexual partner and force the woman to accept that her husband is the appropriate sexual partner. She has a goddess installed into her, and then she ought to return and be a perfect wife, maybe even having a new sanctity about her, but only through submission to the society, to the goddess, and to the goddess's community. The problem for the women and the marriage is lustful thoughts toward the demon. She encourages the demon. The pay might grab her and catch her, but she wants it by acting out, by separating from the husband, by engaging in emotional reveries. So while she's possessed, she's frigid and she's barren because she's thought to be in a sexual relationship with the demon. The demon and her erotic thoughts must be removed. The removal or the exorcism is therapy. But this is a therapy that doesn't empower a woman, it silences her. So the women are the woman who is the most likely to be possessed is a woman who recognizes how poorly she's been treated, so she runs away. She acts out, and she refuses sex with her husband. Her cure silences her by making her desires gone, by removing her desire to escape her abuse or her plight. They make her desire to escape even the machinations of the demon who has then been dispelled. Her cure reaffirms her role in the patriarchal or male society that controls her. Now, Novakov witnessed that some women resist, saying that the pay died naturally at an old age, or that it caught her in a pleasant place, so they wouldn't follow the script, and that would screw up the ritual. So there is some glimmer of resistance. But what we're really looking at here is women acting out and showing agency in some way or another, and then them being accused of being possessed, which would be the root of their acting out and not wanting to be involved with their husbands. Then they have a ritual that is done to remove their unsatisfaction, their emotionality, their problematic thoughts and minds, and then they reestablish a goddess within them. And then after that, they're thought to just return and everything's all hunky-dory. Notice there's no change to her situation in any way. She's just had her mind changed for her so she can get with the program. We'll hear this type of thinking later when we talk about new religious movements. So here we're at the end. So what I want you to think about is, what about these good trances? What about that woman that came in and danced around? What about when Shanti dances after she has the goddess installed within her? What about goddesses who are oracles? So someone can become possessed by their Hindu goddess or their clan goddess or their local goddess and speak the future or give advice to people or do rituals. So we've looked at the malicious dead. Our next task will be look at the beneficent dead, at the good dead. See you next time.